Yeah, I mean, from the age of, I don't know, 7, I think my really only goal in life was to be a writer.
Mhm.
It's what I always did, and I studied English and writing and philosophy in college, and still just always had this vision of being a writer. And so I managed to hack together a quasi living doing that for 10 years, freelancing for a lot of places, 75 bucks a pop for, a show, a concert preview in the Village Voice. But it was, amazing to see your name in print. And that was just, just the path I was on, the thing that I loved. But while doing that, I discovered that I didn't think of it as being entrepreneurial, but I started a couple zines. I started a record label. I was just doing stuff that felt interesting and fun, and just, I'm seeing great bands. Let's try helping more people hear about them. And it was during that period of time that I met Perry Chen. Perry had the idea for Kickstarter and crowdfunding a couple of years before. And we just became friends at a restaurant in Brooklyn where we would hang out. And he told me about this idea he had for a conditional funding platform. And his first iteration had been in music. It was wanting to put on a concert and not being able to pay the money to have it happen. And so tickets being pre-sold ahead of time. And I didn't think that we were being entrepreneurs or doing a startup. It was just, hey, that's a cool idea. And yeah, I work in music. Like, this is my world. This makes sense. Let's start thinking about this. And so really it felt like just like a fun thing to conspire with a friend about more than anything. And I think that the process of turning that idea into a business and into like a technology company were the things that we had to learn. But really, I think it was just me coming from that cultural space and caring about those things. And then here's a great idea that solves a lot of the issues that I think about. And so, of course, we should do this. And so it just felt like I don't know, just it was somehow just an obvious next step. It was just right in front of us.
What were some of the key steps you took that you think made Kickstarter such a success?
Well, I think that the strength of the initial idea is a huge amount of it. I mean, that idea continues to be powerful in GoFundMe, or if you think about Patreon, turning it into a ongoing relationship. Just the idea that fans and artists, and really at this point, just people and people, can have direct financial or other kinds of supportive relationships that were maybe socially awkward in a pre-internet world, but the internet, just the sort of the distance and anonymity and the way we can reach so broadly makes it more palatable. I think for us as founders, for myself, Perry, and Charles Adler, there was a weird benefit in that it was many years of working on the platform before it was live. We were 3 non-technical founders working with outside tech people, and had a lot of ups and downs with that. And what was helpful during that time was we just talked to a lot of people about the idea, talking to artists of all stripes, feeling them out, learning how to explain the idea of crowdfunding, conditional funding, an idea that no one had heard of. And you do that so many times, you would see when someone's eyes glazed over and they stopped listening, and you realize, oh, this is not a good way to talk about this. So I think during those years of pain and struggle, there was a lot of honing in on how do we make this something that people can understand, and how do we make this something that people are excited about. And a lot of that came through conversation, and just came from just learning and talking to people. And so I think that by the time we opened our doors in 2009, there was both the core idea, which was so strong, and then we were quite confident about how we were doing it because we'd spent years talking to people about it. And I think we knew there was no right or wrong answer here, like we were introducing a new concept, but we felt confident that the way we were talking about it was a way that someone could get. And so I think that was a significant part of it.
What was the moment where you thought, wow, this is huge, this is working?
There's a moment I can remember very clearly of 3 weeks. So to start a project, you had to be invited, and Foundation currently is using the exact same structure that we used, where you had to be invited by an administrator of Kickstarter to start a project. But if you got invited to start a project, you got 5 invites you could give to other people. And so it was creating sort of a false scarcity around who could launch. And but people were sharing those with people that they respected. And it was interesting to see the project starting to reach social circles a little bit beyond us. And it was 3 weeks after we were live, a project went up by a musician named Allison Weiss, who at the time lived in Athens, Georgia. Last I knew, lived in Greenpoint. And she was making an EP. She was in college at the time. And Allison invented the language of crowdfunding, really. In her video, every crowdfunding trope ever since was invented in that moment, where she does, multiple awkward false takes, a lot of quick cuts. She says she'll write a song about you. She introduced a stretch goal. First time stretch goals were ever used because she reached her goal in the first day. And the way that she interacted with backers and told her story, I remember we just felt like this is alive in a different way than anything else was. And it kind of felt like here someone has taken this form, this medium that, we are proposing to the world, and they've turned it into something that is like a living, breathing thing. And that was a real moment, because she, like everyone else, immediately copied her because all of her ideas about how to do it were so good. And that just created a very, like a nice warm and fuzzy vibe around the projects, just really from the energy that she brought. And she did, multiple projects after, and each of those also were sort of like standard setters in different kinds of ways. But to a large degree, I give her credit for, just the way she was able to express herself through a tool.
So in 2017, you stepped down as CEO. Why did you decide to step down, and what's your current role within the company?
I left in September, I think, September of 2017, something like that. I'd been full-time for, almost a decade, and had been working on Kickstarter pretty consistently for longer. And, I got tired. I think that my love for everything about it, didn't wane. But there were parts of it that just sucked a lot of energy out of me. And I think I started to reach a point of, just low energy, just feeling an exhaustion that was hard to shake. And so that was a really hard thing, because I'd always been the Kickstarter guy. Like, you'd have to drag me away from my computer to to do one more thing, or to, go meet some creators. Like, I just truly enjoy it. But yeah, I think the well got tapped empty. And when that happened, I had a lot of conversations with the board and other folks, and I made the decision that I wanted to completely step away. So I stepped off the board, and I just really felt like I don't want to use that part of my brain for a while. Maybe in a few years it could be activated again, but I think right now I just need to let that go. I think that's the best thing for me. That was a hard choice, but it has been the right one for me, in that it's created space for me to rebuild energy and feel all the gratitude for the journey of Kickstarter, and feeling great about what it has done and continues to do in the world. But yeah, it was just like just hitting a wall, just kind of hitting a wall.
So in 2019, 2 years after you stepped down, you published This Could Be Our Future, a manifesto for a more generous world. And in it, you write that if businesses were optimized for the community and for genuine sustainability, the rich would still be rich, just not as rich. And the average person would just have more tools to live a comfortable life. How can we get there? And what are some necessary steps from your perspective?
Well, I think it's happening. Obviously that book came out pre-COVID. There's been the acceleration since COVID. But I think that the core argument of this book, and partially it was based on my Kickstarter experience, but other things as well. But it's that we've settled on a very limited notion of value and self-interest. Value equals money. Self-interest is what each of us individually want right now. And that has been the operating procedure for society for the past 50 years or so. Both of those things are changing. Both of those things I think are really changing. Number one, value. Money means something very different now in a lot of interesting ways. I mean, post-COVID, I think there's $1.5 trillion more in people's checking accounts, over the past year. Money has become this weird social tool in this subscription newsletter, even crypto world. It's like a political tool that a lot of people are engaging with. And I think just as much, the climate crisis and COVID have really changed how we think about self-interest. We all definitely feel our individualism, being isolated during this past year. But of course, we're also so aware of the interdependencies we have with each other. And of course, COVID is just like an appetizer for climate change and the bigger questions we're going to face. So I think that we are at a point where we're being forced to recognize and forced to reckon with these things, and that our time horizon of self-interest is extending. And the future is something that we're starting to get a clearer picture on. To me, the future for the past 10 years was defined as the next iPhone release. We couldn't think past that. But I think the future, the climate is making us think about that quite differently. And then post-COVID, the degree of social interdependencies on a personal level, on a neighborhood community level is really high. But I also just think the internet has really begun this process of transforming us into networked organisms. And I think into fundamentally a different evolutionary type of human being that there's ever been before. And I think that all of those things are going to lend themselves very naturally to a significant shift in the mindset that has been so dominant. And I think you see this in boomers or older generations feeling quite alienated by younger generations. But I look at Greta Thunberg as she's like a moderate time traveler from 30 years in the future. That's just what normal perspectives in 30 years that are being brought to us today to really remind us, put in more perspective, the stakes of where we are. And so to me, I think that this is a huge shift in values that's happening at really every level of society. And, my book was written before COVID, so I was seeing this need and seeing what I thought were inklings in this direction. But I believe it's happening, and I am long-term optimistic, and even medium-term optimistic. I don't think these are simple or easy things, but I think that just the degree of change that's been possible, even in the past year, is extraordinary. I mean, I recently interviewed David Wallace Wells, who wrote The Uninhabitable Earth, and he was saying how 2 years ago, the world, every default was tilted against decarbonizing the world. Now, almost every default is tilted towards decarbonizing the world. And there's just been this significant change that's happened in the last 18 months.
What do you think the growing interest in crowdfunding and patronage platforms, like you mentioned, shows about people's needs and desires, or suggest about current financial structures and business models that work, ones that don't?
Yeah, to me, it just says that the stories that we tell ourselves are true, but they are not entirely true. And when we were trying to fundraise for Kickstarter, almost every investor we talked to would say, no one's going to give anybody money unless they get a piece, unless they get points, unless they get upside. And so they're coming from this place of the classic rational economic man idea of all any of us are, we are just, economically optimizing for ourselves. And this is how a lot of people see the world. And in that universe, crowdfunding makes no sense. It's irrational. Why would I give you money to write your book? That's risky. I'll just buy it later if it's good. Why would anybody do such a thing? But of course, what this reveals is that we get a lot out of helping each other. And we get a lot out of participation, out of seeing something exist. Our ego is fed, we feel love. There's all sorts of things that happen that our previous systems just couldn't account for. And because they couldn't account for them, because they couldn't financially exploit them, they were just ignored or deemed less important, or that's too small to bother ourselves with. But of course, when you have the plumbing of the internet and tools like Kickstarter, Patreon, all these things to lubricate these sorts of interactions, you find that people are very willing to do these things. People actually like doing these things. It's not a big ask, and it's a degree of love that can be spread around. And so I think that this desire, these impulses have always been there. I think the opportunity to follow through on them hasn't been there. And to me, it just shows the limits of our knowledge. We assume because it's done a certain way, that's why it's done. That's why it always must be done. But over and over, we find that just expanding the option set, a couple things will just reveal, actually, there are a lot of different motivations people come here with. And it ultimately shows, like, even in every, say, product category in business, that there's a lot of different ways to succeed, and so to me, it just states that we should be less certain about what we believe to be true, and that I think trusting in a goodness and a generosity in people is a pretty good bet. I think in general, you'll be treated well by having those kinds of instincts.
So there are definitely positives to the growth of, direct to creator payments and Patreon, Substack, but at the same time, I feel like maybe it just creates new hierarchies where on Spotify, Ariana Grande is making so much money on her streams where smaller artists are not making as much. And then same with Substack, where the top newsletter creators are making all the money. How do you kind of understand that? Is there any chance to level the playing field?
Well, I think those, to some degree, those hierarchies are real, and they are reflective elsewhere in the world. I don't think that they were manufactured in those places.
Right.
And if anything, maybe those are places where there is a chance to reset the hierarchies. Maybe not like Spotify and major label artists versus, my family band. Like, that's not, there's, the world is as it is there. But I think in general, saying that the internet, and it's the way the word democracy gets overused by startup founders to describe whatever they're doing is ridiculous. But like, truly democratization of access, of, all those things, I think levels the playing field overall, right? You're just creating opportunity for people to prove themselves in various ways. And in general, I think that works out better than systems that are based on nepotism or access or whatever. So they're not going to produce a total egalitarian universe, and such a universe is not possible. But I think that they have the potential to get us to something that's closer. What is hard for just like the personal experience is feeling like, feeling that chasm of like, everyone is more successful than me, or why can't I get the attention they get? Or, a lot of the feelings I think we all experience online, watching people who are good at things and not feeling as good at them. And the degree to which, pre-internet, you could be like the smartest person in your small town and that meant something. Now you log on online, you're like, whoa, I'm the 50 millionth smartest person on this Reddit thread. It's like, what in the world? And so that is, there's like a personal recalibration that has to happen on the internet. That it is different in a way, because just everybody's here and there are some amazing people in the world. So, I don't think like true equality of everyone having the same level of subscribers or something is possible. But in general, I think that these tools are for the broad benefit. Not universally, not in every case, but in general, I think that's fair.
So in your book, you talk about your decision-making framework, Bentoism, and the Bento Society, which you've described as a post-capitalist laboratory, future-oriented community, and a breakfast club for adults. Could you give me a mini lesson or spiel on Bentoism and perhaps the pitch that you give a potential member?
Yeah, actually, we're going to show video. Can I show a couple slides?
Absolutely.
Let's do this live. Let me find, because it will be helpful to have a visual aid as I just walk this through very quickly. I'll have it right here. Yeah, so there's this philosophy called Bentoism, and it started for me while I was thinking about this question of self-interest. Because self-interest is at the heart of capitalism. Like Adam Smith writes about how the butcher serves you their food, not out of any sort of generosity, but in regard to their own self-interest. So self-interest is this very core concept in the West. And when we visualize self-interest today, we think of this, what in Silicon Valley is called a hockey stick graph, where a chart of whatever it is that you want, power, users, influence, is growing so fast, the line slopes up and to the right. But when you think about it and take a step back, you see that this is actually a small slice of a much larger picture, because the x-axis representing time goes from now all the way into the future. And the y-axis representing your self-interest, it also extends, because as your self-interest grows, so do your responsibilities. The difference between being single and having a family is huge, or being an employee versus being a boss who manages employees. The ways you think about things are very different. And so we can actually imagine there being 4 distinct spaces of our self-interest. There's now me, what I as an individual want and need right now. This is how we tend to think of self-interest today. There's future me, what the older, wiser version of me wants me to do. That person is becoming real or not real based on the decisions I make at any given moment. There's now us, the people in my life who I care about and who care about me, my family, my core friends. My choices affect them just as their choices affect me. And finally, there's future us, the world our children will inhabit, or the future versions of ourselves or future generations. And absolutely, our decisions affect them too. And so what you quickly realize is that we leave footprints in all of these spaces, and all of these spaces affect us. But yet today, we're functionally blind to everything except this space of now me. We're all just trying to go get ours. And these notions of other people in the future, we know they matter, but they're like these hazy things that we can't quite put our finger on. And so the first time I drew this picture, going through the same sequence of slides as I just showed you, going from a hockey stick graph to this, I thought, what is this simple 2x2 chart here I drew? And I wrote a basic description. I said, beyond near-term orientation. This was just simply a very functional tool to help you see beyond the near term. And I realized that these letters made an acronym that said bento. And I thought about the bento box, the Japanese packed lunch with 4 compartments and a lid that lets you carry a variety of dishes, not too much of any one thing, so always a balanced meal. And it also honors a Japanese dieting philosophy called hara hachi bu, which says the goal of a meal is to be 80% full. That way you're still hungry for tomorrow. So the bento is the same idea, but for our values and our decisions. A way to make choices, not just indulging in this now me as we currently think about things, but to make space for other people and for tomorrow. And so this is not just like a concept in a book, it's an actual interface, a tool that you can use. So I'd want to give one example to you here. So we can imagine a smoker asking their bento, should I quit smoking? And in this case, to use it, the smoker would ask each of these boxes individually to hear what it has to say. The smoker's now us, which thinks about their family, says, yeah, quit. Like, we hate that you smoke. The smoker's future us, which thinks about the future generation, their kid says, well, what if I smoke because of you? Please quit. The smoker's future me says, I want there to be a future me. Let's quit right now. But the smoker's now me is addicted to nicotine. And it says, no, don't quit. I love smoking. Like, what are we doing here? And the challenge here is that each of these voices is correct. No one is wrong here. Everyone is speaking from their own true perspective. But the challenge, and it's that in a world where we only listen to this now me, like we do now, we have this passive awareness of the world, we tend to make decisions that are good for us now, but don't work out for us in the long run. So this is how addiction can look rational, like it's good for now, even if it's bad for the future. Or sacrifice, say giving up something now to get more later, seems untenable. And so the bento is a way to see this active awareness, to have a concrete vision of these other dimensions of your life, to be opinionated about them, to make decisions that are optimizing for them, and to really integrate them into every choice that you make. So I'll stop there, but I have a bento of my own values that I've used to make every decision for the past 3 years. And it is a grounding in what I care about. And it allows me to make decisions that are like very coherent with who I am. And this really started for me. It started at Kickstarter, where, I felt uncomfortable as a founder CEO. The way that like my opinion was right about everything, right? People would go to me, what is the right answer in this case? And I was expected to be the holder of this kind of truth, of this knowledge of what was right for the organization. And to me, that felt like that knowledge should be shared. That should be something that we can all make decisions on. And that should be something that someone else in the company could say to me, no, you're wrong, because actually this is what's important. But yet we didn't really have anything that made that palatable, that made that like a compass for people to really act from. And so the bento, to me, is a model, and I work with companies to use it, is a model for making your mission, your values, your stakeholders, and your vision for your organization like something that everyone in the org shares and that people actively use to make decisions. It's not just a thing that hangs on the wall or a thing you think about, every now and then, but it's front and center. So I've been on this path of following the bento, leading a community of people called the Bento Society, and really, I think I'm still, learning from this model. I'm 3 years into like really being deep with it, and honestly, like each week I'm learning really things that are changing how I understand myself and how we relate to each other. So it's been an amazing journey to be on.
So the first step is coming up with your 4 values.
Yeah. So the first step is, I'll share the screen once again. I'll just show quickly. For each of these boxes, now us, future me, now me, there's just like a basic question you ask yourself: what is it that this part of me wants and needs? And the first time you do it, you just get like a brain dump of a lot of stuff. What is our now me? All of our now me needs. We need some money. We need good health. We need some security. There's like basic stuff. But then, who are the people in our life that are most important to us? And what is at the heart of our relationships? Who is it that I want to be at the end of my life? And just trying to write those things down. And then you come up with like your core values, sort of the phrases you'll remember, the simple guides that can help you make decisions, know what is right for you and what is less right for you. And so this is what mine looks like. This is reminding me of what's important to me. But for a company, it's very similar. We can take Apple. You take Apple's mission statement, tools for the mind that advance humankind. I'm summing up their values as think different, the 90s ad campaign. It's key in your bento to identify as an organization your key stakeholders and what you promise to them. So for Apple's customer promise, it's to make technology that just works. You don't need a manual to use a Mac. And then Apple's vision is an advanced humankind because they want their actions to have some result, and Apple growing. And so you can take these things and layer them onto a bento. Here's Apple's bento. There's their mission. There's their values, their stakeholders, and their vision. And we can imagine Tim Cook thinking, okay, so the AirPods, is this a good Apple product for us? Well, let's check our bento. Let's see. Is it a tool that could advance humankind? Yeah, probably. Does it think different? Well, yeah, it doesn't have wires. So that's cool. Does it have this just works customer expectation? Well, yeah, because you put them in, they play, you take them out and they stop. It's kind of magical. So yeah, this seems like it could be a totally Apple product. And of course it is. You compare that to the Apple Touch Bar released at the same time. Could it advance humankind? Yeah, maybe. Does it think different? Sure. Don't see other people doing this. But almost every review of this product noted that it didn't actually provide any real functionality. And so it actually didn't just work. In the end, this product failed for Apple. Like people didn't like this and ultimately it didn't work. And so even though it satisfies like some dimensions, some expectations, because it didn't satisfy all of them, it wasn't ultimately something that clicked to the degree that it could. And so what this shows is that each of these spaces are important dimensions to think about, to be opinionated about. But when you make decisions that satisfy all of these things together, it's like this extra coherence that happens. And this is like the flow state kind of stuff. And this is possible when you actually know for yourself what's important in those spaces. And so again, this works on an organizational or a personal level. And it's really just about defining shared values, stated values, goals, and then providing yourself this very basic tool to make consistent decisions to get there.
So how can a company like Apple hold themselves accountable for anything beyond profit? Their values probably all come back to what's going to make Apple rich and powerful?
Well, I mean, it's interesting for Apple. I think what you find for a lot of the best companies, like the market leaders in most categories, is probably there is a goal to a financial satisfying that's happening, but they're probably optimizing for something else. Like Apple, I think Apple's optimizing for design, brand, a certain kind of experience. Amazon optimizes for customer experience. Now, these strategies are still in their self-interest. Like Amazon optimizing for the now us of their customers does help Amazon and harms their competitors. And like these are ultimately things that do help these organizations in their own goals. But I think the best places aren't so direct about it. They're a little different. So where Apple could be supported by something like a Bento, to me, it really comes down to identifying your stakeholders in that now us. So every organization, you have your employees, you have your investors, you have your customers, you probably also have suppliers or people you collaborate with. But there's also, of course, the community that you're a part of, the professional networks that you're a part of, even your employees' families. If you say you care about work-life balance, then you're saying your employees' families are a part of your self-interest in what you think about. And where a lot of organizations can go astray is by betraying those core promises to one of those stakeholders. You do something that makes your customers feel like you violated a relationship, or and so that's where I think organizations get into trouble. And that's also where the best organizations really succeed, is by having an extremely well-honed sense of like what the customer cares about, or how to create an environment where employees can be free to share their opinions, and it actually is collaborative, or whatever those things might be. But building on those core promises you have with your stakeholders is how you create reputation. It's how you create long-term value. It's how you succeed. Like everyone is trying to make more money than they spend and be beloved, right? But if you just only try to do those two things, you're not going to do that well at it. Actually, the best way to do that is by solving someone else's problem, or trying to manifest something bigger. Just going straight from point A to point B is, it can get the job done, but it's not going to make an impact. It's not going to turn heads. It's not going to win over, a deep and devoted audience. So to me, the Bento is it's still a map to self-interest. It's still like, what do you want? Here's how to get what you want. But it's revealing that what you want is not just about this little now me. It's also about satisfying these other people that are around you. And if we're all thinking that way, selfishly, the world gets better. The world gets better. It doesn't need us to be generous or to be like these great benefactors. Just us looking out for ourselves, but in a slightly more self-aware way, produces, I believe, a significantly better world.
Do you think there's a chance for like Jeff Bezos to adopt this kind of thinking, someone who's at the top, whose workers are, suffering? Is it possible to really create change? Does that have to come from the top?
Does it have to come from the top? The top has to be a part of it. I think employees and the public have more power in these situations than ever before. So I think they are also a real part of the picture. But yeah, I think the goal has to be that. The goal is not for this to be like the indie feel-good hit. Like the goal is for these ideas to be the mainstream. Mm-hmm. And the way that happens is not by morally imploring someone to change their mind. Mm-hmm. The way that happens is to prove that better outcomes are possible. Better outcomes are possible through this level of thinking. You know what? We all do want these same kinds of things, but where we struggled is we haven't had a clear picture of how to do them. What you learn is that actually, if you think a little bit more about other people, if you anticipate the future a bit more, your prospects, are going to be much improved. So to me, the way to win these arguments is through outcomes. It's ultimately saying, here's a better way. And like this system has to compete with short-term individualism, which is like short-term individualism runs the Western world. It runs the world to agree that it is invisible. But ultimately, this model of expanded self-interest or expanded sense of values other than just financial value, these are systems that are going to have to compete in not exactly a marketplace, but they're going to have to compete for what can provide the most utility the most value to people who use them. So that is what's incumbent on the Bento or any other system. You gotta beat what's on the board, and you have to do that. To me, it's by effectiveness. And the Bento is 3 years old. Like it's still very new, but it works. It truly does. I mean, over and over, like when I first had the idea of drawing those pictures, it made sense to me. And I thought, oh, I wish I had this at Kickstarter. Like this would have helped me. But I didn't know whether to believe that or not. So I was living in LA at the time. I reached out to a friend, this 90-year-old woman who hosted salons in her house. And I said, I want to try sharing an idea. Can you get some people together? And so a few weeks later, I was standing in front of 30 some strangers in her house trying to explain Bentoism. And I needed to know if I could say the idea without throwing up. And I wanted to see the look on another human being's face, so I didn't know, to see what happened. And that conversation was amazing. The questions people asked taught me so much about the idea. Immediately I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't even think of it that way. And people running with it to where I left that, 90-minute time together. And I thought, okay, this is a real thing. It made me feel like I found something. I didn't create something. I found something that was true. And that created a feeling of responsibility. Like, okay, well, what to do with this? And so same with the Bento Society, the people I'm working with, and these are people applying in their lives, and at work, in their marriages, whatever, just people, and just watching people who I respect and have grown to really like from all around the world, and seeing the utility this has for them. Again, it just says, okay, this is real. This is something that there's meaning here. There's value here. And so I very much feel in that same boat of my life has been made better through this. I'm learning through it. Where it ultimately goes. I mean, I have certain ideas and expectations, not expectations, but ideas and hopes. But for now, all I can say is that it truly brings value to my life and to, hundreds of other people's lives that I can say for certain.
So according to the website, the society includes everyone from gig workers to CEOs to scientists. How do their values and desires compare? And do the higher earning Bento Society members maybe attempt to redistribute their wealth or put their money where their mouth is? How about other members?
Well, it's a Radiohead model of community where it's pay what you want. So definitely I have some $1 a year annual members, and I have some, many hundreds of dollars a year annual members. So people are opting in that way. I think people are finding it through, a lot of them is just hearing me on podcasts or things talking about it. But there's a lot of people sharing with their friends and their networks. We have these things called Bento groups, which are groups of up to 10 people who meet every week on these sort of self-directed journeys. And there are 8 of those groups. So those are 80 people who've been meeting every week together for, many months. And those are people that, there's a group with a gig worker and a retail employee and a VC are in that group together, and they are supporting each other. I'm not in the room. I don't know what's happening in those conversations, but they're just meeting as people. I think that where a lot of people come at this is, say they feel their relationships are lacking in their life. I'm very professionally career focused, but, do I have people in my life that truly love me? Am I doing enough for other people in my life? In the sense of making that us a core part of your decision-making, a core part of how you use your time, I think is something that really gets to people. And then I think there are a lot of folks who just generally feel dissatisfied. I feel incomplete by, even if they are succeeding in the game as they're told it is now. There's a funny thing where you start to win, that you work so hard to succeed in this game, and you start to win. And as you do, you realize, oh wait, why was I doing this? Was this a destination worth getting to? And then a new search kind of begins. So, to me, it's just people who, I don't know, they heard the idea in a moment and it said to them, this opens up something for me, and they stick with it. There's a lot of it that's about a practice, a community of practice. We build our weekly to-do list using this form. So it proves to be pretty sticky for people.
Switching gears a bit, Kickstarter started as a venture-backed company. How do you feel about the current VC ecosystem as it's kind of ramped up and turned into this hyper VC space?
Well, I think that we were always on the fringes of the tech world in general. I mean, being in New York, you kind of are, and then becoming a public benefit corporation. And even when we raised money, we did it in our own sort of interesting ways, saying we were not going to exit. There's not going to be an IPO. Like this is a long-term building an institution. Are you down for that? And, Union Square Ventures, in my mind, the best venture firm there is. We're open to that. And I think because they understood our thinking and, kind of the cultural direction we were coming from. I think that money is funny right now. Money is fuel, money is defense, money is a brand statement. Like there's just so much of it happening. In general, I think that investment into new ideas is positive. And would I make the investments everyone is making? Of course not. But that's not how the world works, nor should it work that way. I think that I think a lot of the valuations that happen, I think that we're seeing these things now. So the scale of these businesses is just being global, just the internet. They affect so many more people. And so I kind of view a lot of these valuations as I'm dividing them by the population of the earth, just thinking, okay, well, this is just saying if everyone in the world uses this thing, that might be possible because of the tool of the internet. And in that case, it might be X valuable or whatever. And, I generally don't have a big problem with these things. I've seen enough huge funding rounds that turn into big busts to know that huge funding rounds aren't that meaningful. It just means that somebody talked somebody else into giving them a lot of money. And, good on you, I guess. I don't know. We explicitly did not do that as Kickstarter because didn't think that was in our interest and wasn't what was best for our project. But I can't judge what someone else is going to do. And a lot of I work with a lot of startups these days, and a lot of them are in climate. And for climate-based startups, some of those people will want to ask me about like the indie Kickstarter strategies. And I'm like, hell no, you got to go big. Like we can't wait for you to be, you have to take over the world. Like there's raise as much as money, get as big as possible. Like this problem is too big. So, I think that just different challenges, different opportunities have these kinds of expectations that go with them. And again, I've seen this enough, and we've certainly seen it with Kickstarter's competitors in the past, that like raising a lot of money is a press release. It means somebody got a lot of money, but it really doesn't mean a lot else.
How do you square your ideology with kind of the harsh realities, people losing their jobs left and right, poverty? How do you square your kind of hope for the future with just the capitalist structures and what they've done to people?
Well, I think, this is maybe where I start, where I will be like, will seem naive. I think generally people are doing the best they can with what they know and with the constraints that are available to them. The degree to which what we know and the constraints available to us have changed, even in my lifetime, are unreal. And I've kind of taken the view that, the path that we're on, it got us to this point where we are now. I think there's a lot to be thankful for about where we are now. I think that I'm one who would say it's probably never been a better time to be alive. than right now. Although I really did like the 80s. But but that we are just, we're just still like striving. We're still trying to reach, and there's human nature that gets in our way, and we're all eminently fallible. And but that, all the steps that all past generations have made have gotten us to where we are now. And it's ultimately our responsibility to keep that going forward, and to keep improving on it. There's a passage that really, I don't know, I think about a lot. It's from the book All the President's Men. Sorry, not All the President's Men, All the King's Men. The book about Huey Long. It's like 1920s Pulitzer Prize winning book about this governor of Mississippi, who's like a kind of corrupt political boss. And there's a scene in the book where the governor is trying to convince this young hotshot doctor who like won't take any money, who's squeaky clean. He's trying to convince him to take some dirty money to build a hospital. And this doctor is refusing. No, I won't take your money. I'm too good for you. And the governor says to him, what your problem is? You're too righteous. What you don't realize is that in this world, some people make shit, and it's somebody else's job to turn that shit into something good. And shit can't just stay shit. You have to turn it into something good. And that's your job. Your job is to make my shitty thing a good thing. And like, you're too afraid to realize it. And that, I don't know, there's some truth to that, to me, to the idea that if we're only waiting for the perfect snowflakes that check the boxes, we're going to be waiting a while. But if instead we view our job as the world is a lot of things, and whatever they are, it's our responsibility to improve upon them to whatever degree is in our capacity. And, to spend our time critiquing the decisions of the past maybe is revealing, can help us learn how to do things better. But ultimately, our responsibility is to improve on the present. That feels right to me. And not that I don't have all the same issues with like not wanting to engage with things that don't, I'm probably more like the doctor than the governor in that scenario. But I think that's an important thing to remember. It's just that, it's been a long series of best efforts by a lot of people that have gotten us to this point, and that continues to be the case. And it's our turn.
What is the best piece of advice you've ever received and the worst piece of advice?
Best piece of advice. Maybe, I don't remember who told it to me. I think I realized it myself, but I had a really helpful realization of thinking nobody cares about you, of being in a place of feeling frozen by self-consciousness. Why, if I do this, then people will think X, or blah, 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 and sort of limiting your own options before you even act out of a result of anticipating, some critique or something. And I had a period of getting sort of tying myself in knots with that. And I just had this realization. I'm like, you know what? No one is thinking about you. no one is thinking about you. Like, why are you, like, who do you think about? Like, like, why do you think this might be the case? And that thought of just actually no one cares. No one cares at all what you're doing, I found to be extremely liberating and humbling. Worst advice, to me, bad advice, I don't know. I've probably gotten a lot of great advice that I was too proud or unable to accept. And so I think like bad advice is more on me maybe than someone else. Because I could think of, and I see it now with working with entrepreneurs where someone is struggling with something just as I have in the past. And to someone who's not in the situation or who's been in it before, it could be quite obvious. Oh, I think maybe what might be happening is X. And it's hard to hear. Sometimes it's hard to hear those things, even when you're being told the truth as straight as you could. And so if I think about bad advice, I think back more to like my failure to take good advice versus someone really telling me something that was wrong.
That's a really nice way of looking at it. um, and what advice would you give what advice would you give to someone who is thinking about quitting their day job and starting a business?
It's a big step. I kept my day job until Kickstarter was live for like 3 months, because I liked my day job. I was like editor in chief of an internet publication. I loved who I worked with, so I kind of felt conflicted about leaving. But it took me a long time to leave because of financial insecurity, and which is a real thing. And I think to do it, I would definitely say, if you can, have several months of money sort of there. Like, starting a business is very difficult. It's especially difficult if you need it to produce materially for you immediately, because that's probably going to lead you to make some decisions that you might later regret, or maybe be a little thirstier than you would like to be. So I think having that base level of security of knowing your basic needs are okay, will just allow you to make better decisions. But I think I would also say, as in the case for me, I was doing Kickstarter nights and weekends for like 3.5 years while having a pretty serious day job that I loved. And that was a lot of energy, but that was really fun. It was really fun. And so doing it on the side, I think that you can do a lot that way. And probably you can make significant headway on whatever your project is, even just taking time away from other things and putting it into that. And so I think doing that, finding traction, like being honest with yourself about, is this working or not working? Giving yourself the opportunity to create that kind of certainty before jumping in with 2 feet. I mean, I would recommend that. And yeah, I think there's a lot that we can do in our time if we are, I think, thinking about it in the right kind of way. And even, you could look at things Tim Ferriss has written, or Sahil Lavinia talks about, and his upcoming book is about that. So, I think being a part-time entrepreneur, not a problem. I think you can get pretty far that way. And then maybe you can have a nice bridge to going full in when it's time.
And then what would you say is the most influential book or text you've ever read? And then, as a former music writer, the most influential album you've ever listened to, or favorite?
For both these questions, I have like 7,000 simultaneous answers.
Right.
But for book, for the context of this conversation and like the Bento, I think the 2 books that really influenced me, one is called Not for Bread Alone by Konosuke Matsushita, who founded Panasonic. And he wrote this book, Not for Bread Alone, when he was in his 80s. Is in the 1980s this book came out. And it's these aphorisms, these simple stories of running his business. But for me, like being a CEO, an entrepreneur who didn't feel like he fit into the entrepreneurial zeitgeist, and who had a lot of imposter syndrome as a result of that, reading this book was like, I had my first role model, my first leadership role model. So that was a really big one for me. And then I also just read a lot of sci-fi, and sci-fi really changes how I see the world. Dune and 3 Body Problem are 2 sci-fi books I would cite. Music-wise, there could be a million answers, but the most important album for me of the past 5 years is a spiritual jazz record from 1973 called Organic Music Society by Don Cherry. And it's just the most alive music you'll ever hear. He was a great trumpeter, and this is just primitive music, tribal, voices, cacophonous. It's amazing. I mean, it makes you feel alive, like nothing else. So yeah, Relativity Suite 2, I would recommend starting with that, but it's an amazing, amazing piece of music.
That's just about all I have, unless you have any parting words on a vision for the Bentoist future, hope for business models and the business models of the future.
Yeah. I mean, events are making us the people that we need to be. The past humans, even the boomer humans, can't imagine individual sacrifice on behalf of a collective good, right? Our notion of now me self-interest is so defined that in the past few years, the climate crisis felt hopeless, right? We'll never change. How would we ever change?
Mm-hmm.
But what we're finding is that change is happening, and that younger generations growing up with the internet are being born and being raised with this mindset that lends itself to solving the single greatest challenge we face.
Mm-hmm.
And so history and events in this amazing evolutionary course of human history, I think, is going to produce a lot of the solutions and changes in mindset that we need to get serious about things we've avoided getting serious about for a long time. And so I remain optimistic. And I ultimately think of my role as a 42-year-old person as being a bridge, trying to be a bridge from the system that's gotten us to this point, for which I think there's lots to be grateful for and a lot that can be improved upon, and bridge that towards systems that are going to be built by a next generation that is anticipating and responding to the problems that we have today. And I think this stuff I think it's going to work. I think it's going to come together, and I have a lot of faith in that process.
You've written about the monoculture of money that leads to gentrification and endless Marvel sequels. You think we're on the path away from that?
Yes. I mean, I think that money as the dominant form of value isn't going to change, but money as the monopoly on value is changing. In the past, money was really the only thing we counted, because counting things is hard. And so you count stuff that's worth something. But in a digital world, counting and tracing behaviors and measuring values in the most minute forms is trivial. It's like the dumbest websites can do that all the time. So the expansion of rationally, numerically defined values is like this huge, post-Cambrian explosion of from just money as being this one peg of all forms of value to now loyalty scores, time on page, various ways that crypto is being distributed. Thinking about the environmental impact of a decision. I think we're going to see prices begin to include, carbon impact as part of them, the same way calories are a part of food. So I think that our dashboards are going to change dramatically. And it's going to happen because climate forces it to happen, and because digital sensors will make identifying trustworthiness or loyalty or these moral values in the past will start to become mathematically expressed. And I think as a result, we'll become competitive with money in a way that they haven't been before. Because in the past, it's you and I could have a 2-hour debate about what's right or wrong, or we could just use a price to settle on something. Well, maybe there's going to be something like a price, but for truth or for other types of qualities that we haven't been able to think of in that way before. So I even think that notion of the value system, I think it's at a real inflection moment of change.
That's really interesting, using it as a competitive unit, but in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, money hasn't had to compete. That's a lot of its dominance. It has become a monopoly on value. It's what makes Wall Street so have so much power. It's just it is the one form that everything has to move through. But the conversion rates are crazy high. It's like an ATM in an airport. And so we are just going to, that monopoly is going to break. And price will compete with loyalty. Price will compete with time. Price will compete with negative impact on the climate in how we make our decisions.